Let me introduce to you the next speaker, Professor Yoshitaka Ishikawa, professor of Kyoto University. He's going to speak on Japan's international migration cannot be a solution of the population decline. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. At the very outset, the Director General Nishimura and Director Ms. Hayashi have given a kind introduction about myself and my research. I would like to shed a light on the same subject from a different perspective and pose this question: Japan's international migration, can it be a solution of the population decline? So I'd like to pose this question because this is attracting a keen attention today as Japan is facing diminishing population. So let me first of all skim through the trend of the international migration, and also I'd like to talk about the Japan situation and the geographical disparity in foreign population is prominent, and the growing severity of issues over population decline, and contributions of foreign population in Japan under population decline, and introduction of high-skilled foreign workers, and conclusion. So that's what I would like to skim through, especially what are the potential contributions that we can expect from the foreign workers. Now, the trends in international migration. This is the first item I would like to cover. Easier said than done. Actually, this accompanies a very complicated facets. One, it is difficult to access accurate statistics. And so how do you define migration? What is the minimum duration of stay would qualify one to be a migrant? It's if you stay for more than 3 months or less, should we consider it is migration? Perhaps we should have a broader definition when we look at the trend in international migration. Now, I call it flow-based. This is the short term. Now, this shows the immigration entry statistics, and so since 1975 to 2010, you see the trends of international migration in Japan using their statistics, and most of them are tourists, in fact, and that's the data from immigration control, and more outflow of tourists from Japan than inflow. Today, the Japan's government is boosting policies to attract more foreign tourist travelers to Japan, and that is resulting in positive increase of inflow of travelers or tourists to Japan. That is to be welcomed. And then the stock base. This is the flow. This is the trend. So you see in blue, that's you see here Japanese overseas and foreigners in Japan. That's in red. So using the statistics available for respective categories, this is what happened. So rather than the Japanese overseas, foreigners in Japan, as you see, is increasing. Now, we often see the registered foreigners. So from 75 to 2010, you see the number of registered foreigners by nationality. As you can see, towards the latter half of 80s, during the so-called bubble economy, there was a shortage of labor, and that was the timing when increase of inflow of foreigners started. And then after that, the bubble burst, and in the past 2 decades, following 2 decades, there followed a period of recession. Nevertheless, even though the economy has been sluggish, we saw steady increase of inflow of foreigners. And because perhaps foreigners in Japan had been able to enjoy the social network, which had been well furnished, so that the recession did not really matter, did not discourage them from coming in. And also, at the same time, there was a gap between their income in their home countries and Japan was still big, so it was still attractive to come to Japan. But that's when the level of recession was quite moderate. However, after Lehman shock, the world financial crisis struck the globe, and then it was a big crisis, and there was a very adverse effect as a result. 2008, 2009, and up to 2011. And this is not described very well, but there is a decline, especially Brazilian migrants are conspicuously declining in number in terms of inflow migrants. And I have quickly skimmed through the trend of international migration. So let me show you that when we look at the migration of people in terms of global population, it is very difficult, challenging to develop short-term prospects. It's easier, rather, to develop a longer-term prospect, because we have to know where they're coming from and what's their destination, their trends, and also the relationships they develop with between the sending and receiving countries. So there are many, many elements that affect the trend. So it's not easy to develop a clear, accurate forecast of short-term migration trend. In December last year, the economic environment had altered gravely. At present, we see the light stepping out of the recession since 1991. That's good news. So in 2000 up to 2008 summer, we saw a very rapid inflow of foreigners, and that seems to be picking up now. However, in Eastern Asia, we see a booming economy. So it might be fair to say that we cannot expect inflow of foreigners as swift as the pre-2008 period from now on. It depends on how brisk the economic recovery might be, but we don't know if we can expect the same kind of vibrant inflow of foreigners after the recovery of economy. But what is going to be the trend of those longer stay migrants and on? We have to try to see. And also there are so-called retirement migration. We need to pay attention to overseas migration of Japanese, including retirement migration. And in near future, we have to also watch carefully how the overseas migration of Japanese would shift, including retirement migration. So these are the factors that we have to keep note of. Next, geographical disparity in foreign population. Well, when the migrants come transcending their national borders to Japan, we have to identify where they come from. So when they cross the national borders, we just pay attention to where they come from. But actually, after they cross the border, it's more difficult to access the information as to where they actually settle. And without the accurate and updated information as to whereabouts of these migrants, we have to develop policies as to how to accommodate them, and where do they shift their residence, how do they do that. So that's almost non-existent in terms of solid data. But I think that is really necessary for us to develop appropriate policies. Now, thanks to the scientific research funds, we were able to develop this map in March 2011, 2 days prior to 3/11, the major earthquake and tsunami that struck northeastern part of Japan. We were able to develop this. So at the end of the day, we very much would like to make this map useful for the policy making to accommodate the migrants, and to increase or to reduce the migrants. How should the policies be developed or changed? This has been discussed so far, and also the reports as to how they are living by mainly through face-to-face interviews. Their main residential areas are covered, but this is quite limited in terms of coverage because there are so many foreigners living in various places. So we only have certain data about the concentrated foreign residents cities or the communities. So that is the area we believe need improvement. Now, today, Japan is facing rapid depopulation, and it is going to accompany increasing number of issues. And so that in order to mitigate these issues, it is becoming increasingly important to try to identify how the migrants or foreigners able to contribute to resolve or mitigate these issues. So the effectiveness of maps in identification of regional disparities shown here. So it's as of 2005. So that's the data. It's not really the update because it's 8 years ago, as of 8 years ago. However, this is as of 2005. This shows the ratio of foreign residents, where they live, how they are distributed. So you see there's a major change in the past. So the Tokai region, that was the central concentration area for foreign residents. And as you go farther away from that concentrated region, you see scarcity and then here's a disparity of foreign population. In the past 5 years, I think we can definitely identify the change. And from northern Kanto region, that's Kanto, into the more middle part, and Tokai region around Nagoya, and then Kinki is around Osaka. As of 2005, those were the central regions where the foreign residents opted to reside. Now, this is often introduced, but the municipalities which have high percentage of foreign residents have actually developed the Council for Cities of Foreign Residents, and there are member municipalities, and we were able to get the data as to the residing foreigners in those member municipalities. So that's shown here. In northern Kanto, especially Gunma Prefecture, Ota, Oizumi, and Isezaki, Ueda. And then, so you see here, around here is a heavy concentration.
And this meeting has been held periodically to show in order to make the suggestions to the local authorities as to the effective measures to enhance conditions for the foreigners. But of course, this is limited to those local governments where there is a major concentration of the foreign residents. So this is not showing the overall general, the nationwide picture, but this almost coincides with the highest the clusters of the foreign residents, and some believe that the issues surrounding the Brazilian the workers are the tantamount to all the issues of foreigners living in Japan, because the Brazilians represent only 30%, but in the Filipinos and the Filipinas tend to live more in the dispersed areas, not concentrating in certain the limited locations. This also should be part of the considered in policies and any effective measures. And anyway, the three major regions see the highest concentrations of the foreigners, and the foreigners also live mostly in the North Kanto and the Kinki areas. But the only limited number of the local governments see more than 10% of the foreign residents percentage of the total population. And when we are to talk with the people from other countries, it's easier to understand that I think three major metropolitan areas they considered separately from other peripheral areas. But in such peripheral or the rural three major metropolitan areas, generally speaking, foreigners, the percentage is lower. And in Tokyo metropolitan and other major cities, the foreigners' percentage is the higher, which is quite similar to other advanced countries. And after entering into Japan, foreigners, do they stay only in a certain places? No, they move within Japan. Because of the limitation of sources, information and statistic, this is the very the rough picture showing what's going on between 1995 and 2000, showing from which prefecture the largest number of foreigners moved to other prefectures. And as you can see here, the red shows the foreigners' destination, which represent the foreigners represent only 1.2 or 1.3% of the total population, and the blue shows the movement of Japan. Generally speaking, they look similar, but the most Japanese move within the Tokyo area and from Tokyo, and also from Osaka to other parts of the world, other parts of the country. But the foreigners also come in to Nagoya area and to also move out of that Nagoya Chubu area. But according to the data, government data in 2010, I think this area has seen a major decline in the number of the Brazilian and the people from other countries because of the economic downturn. So if you compare left and right, I think the picture in 2010 should look quite identical. And so between 1995 and 2000, we saw the major inflow into Nagoya, Shizuoka, and the Nagano prefectures. And so the foreigners mitigated the excess concentration of the people in three major areas of Japan. But because of the recession since 2008, the attractiveness of the manufacturing areas such as Chubu and Nagoya declined. On the other hand, the concentration to Tokyo might have increased. As you are fully aware of, well, the 2000 up to 2010 we have actual figures, and after that we have the estimated figures. And we are here, and so as you can see, total population will continue to decline, and the rate of the decrease will further accelerate beyond 2020. And so I think this should be part of our thinking when we consider international migration of Japan. So this is a Japanese, and this shows the foreigners. As these show, only 11 prefectures saw the growth of population. And this shows, with the exception of Yamaguchi Prefecture, all the prefectures show the growth of the foreigners. And so some foreigners saw the more than 40% growth rate of the foreigners. But this data are rather old. And so this is the graph from the previous map. Japanese increased only slightly, but the number of foreigners, as you can see in the yellow graph, they have the very rapid growth rate, with the exception of the Kinki areas. And then 5 years later, from 2005 until 2010, the decline of the Japanese population, of course, was also remarkable. But perhaps in order to the foreigners, we wish that the foreigners would have replaced it, but the manufacturing areas, Kinki and Chubu and the Tohoku areas, also saw the decline of the foreign residents during this period. So the period showed kind of outliers according out of the trend. Between 2000 to 2005, we saw the decline of the foreigners because of the economic recession. And that trend hasn't been overcome yet. So the total population of Japan is declining. So if we are to expect the foreign population to make contributions to the Japanese society, what would there be? Of course, the time is limited for me, but I'd like to focus upon 3 points. One, is it possible to invite the foreigners to live outside of the major metropolitan areas? The replacement migration report was issued by the United Nations, and that also stimulated discussions in Japan. And generally speaking, this report was kind of dismissed, although the idea itself was believed to be interesting. And but at that time, the population decrease hadn't started, but the population is already declining in Japan. So I think this concept deserves more attention by the Japanese as a whole, even though whether the word itself is appropriate or not. And the birth rate of Japan, total fertility rate, is now declining. That's also a major reason for the population decline in Japan. And according to Mr. Yamauchi of the demographer, the foreigners, the fertility rate won't be higher than the Japanese, even though the policy could be designed better. But we cannot expect the high fertility rate of the pre-2011. So we can only expect the net inflow of the foreigners if we are to expect to increase the Japanese population. Then how can we design our policies to increase the net migration of foreigners into Japan? While I was reading the UN report, I was also thinking about this. So some say, some expect the certain number of the foreigners coming into Japan. But even though quantification is very difficult, perhaps we can devise appropriate policies in order to make Japan more attractive for the foreigners to come in and live in. So of course, the Japanese reaction was quite equal to the UN report on replacement migration that was issued 10 years ago, because the report was only expect the foreigners to replace the absolute number of decline of the Japanese population. But toward the end of this report, you see important ideas and suggestions as to how we can design the policies to have the better relations with the source countries, and also the measures for the women and also workers and the minors and so on. So even though the 10 years ago the discussion focused on pure numbers, but today we need to focus our discussion on the process leading up to the net increase of the population of Japan. So the birth rate is not expected to grow, so we need to consider policy measures from various different perspectives for foreigners coming into Japan. But of course, Japan is not a monolithic, and there are many areas in Japan, and the population is going down over more than 20 years in some population, in some local governments. For example, according to Suzuki, the local governments, municipalities, perhaps they should consider inviting foreigners to replace their declining population, as you can see in the last of the relevant literatures. And is it really possible then to have effective policies to have foreigners in the rural areas? In Tokyo, of course, it is really difficult to accept the idea that only Tokyo would flourish and prosper. I welcome the Tokyo's hosting the Olympic Games in 2020, but that shouldn't serve as the factor to accelerate the decline of other parts of Japan. And then what kind of the policies should there be to lead the foreigners outside of the major areas, particularly Tokyo? perhaps the incentives would be provided. I think this is particularly important for today's Japan. There are about 20 status of the residents for foreigners, and the previous map shows that the three major areas have the largest absolute number of foreigners, but in addition, also in peripheral local areas, they see some increase of the foreigners according to 2008 figures. For example, the industrial trainees of quite a large number of industrial trainees live in non-three major metropolitan areas of Japan. So I think such status of residents, I think, could be used more, the better, so that those the non-Tokyo, non-Osaka areas see more foreigners settling their regions. And because these the people would make a major contribution to the economic and social revitalization of the local economy and of the local communities. And even with such measures, however, the foreigners might go out of those rural areas again to live in Tokyo and the major areas. I think there is no way for us to prevent it. But I looked for policy examples of effective policies, but as Professor Hugo mentioned, in Australia, there are certain incentives for foreigners living outside of the capital or the major industrial areas, which is a very heartening examples for Japan to emulate.
Now, the second theme is contribution of foreign populations in Japan under population decline and inflows of non-metropolitan regions through international marriage. And from 1980s, we see inflow of foreign females. And this is true especially in metropolitan areas, particularly Tokyo. However, the role of foreign and female migrants are more significant where inflows and settlement of foreign females alleviate rapid population decline. And the implication of lower sex ratios in non-metropolitan regions is shown here. The darker the color, there are more females. And the more blue the color, we have more males rather than females. So if you look at Japan, around the metropolitan areas, so in rural areas, we have more females than men. And what is the reason? We must look into the reason, but we think the probable cause is that this is through international marriage, where the Japanese men marry a foreign woman. That is the only reason we can think of the sex ratio of foreigners and more women than men. This is inflow of foreign females to non-metropolitan regions. And so spouse comes and also the child is born. So in non-metropolitan regions, these foreign spouses have supported the decline, or they've stopped the decline in the population decrease. If these foreign women didn't come to Japan, we would have seen a further decline in population in non-metropolitan areas. However, this is a very sensitive issue because a country cannot promote international marriage, so we don't need to do that. Spouse choice is an individual decision, so there's no room for policy intervention. However, there's a high divorce rate for international marriages because of different backgrounds. And also, as I mentioned, and also Ms. Hayashi also mentioned, that international marriage has been on the decrease. And the reason, I think Professor Inoue will talk about it in the panel discussion. So in the past, international marriage has been a good thing to stop the decrease in population, but it means that now we're going to see a more decrease in population. So how should we look at this issue? I have made a research into an agency coordinating international marriage. And in case there is an agency in between, people who got married do not want to say they used an agency. So there's a lot of fights or conflicts in the couple. So if these people who married, they went to the agency to settle the dispute, this would be good. But a lot of researchers who've looked into this, they say that foreign spouses who came to Japan after marriage, they should be taken care of by local governments and national governments. So I hear this opinion all over Japan, and I hope that the governments will facilitate the settlement of these foreign spouses. This is the number of international marriages. 2006 was the peak, and we see a rapid decline. This is looking at the nationality of spouses. And if you look at the sex ratio of never married Japanese people, and Japanese government is trying to take policies to promote more marriages, but the Japanese women are getting more higher education, and you see we are seeing a distorted sex ratio. If we see this all over Japan, it's okay. However, in Japan, Japanese males are having difficulty getting married. So for East Japan, people are having more difficulty in getting married, especially in southern Kanto. And even if you look at one prefecture, the big cities, the capital of the prefecture, there are opportunities for men and women to meet. So when we see the mountainous areas, men are having difficulty to meet women, and this is really a fixed condition. So unless the condition changes, there's going to be a continued difficulty for men to get married. And now we see less of an international marriage where these men are having difficulty getting married to foreign women either. And we're not we cannot expect the population to grow because there is less marriage. Now, third topic is the introduction of high-skilled foreign workers. Of course, we welcome high-skilled workers. This is a policy to motivate foreign students completing PhD to stay in Japan. So, May last year, this policy started. However, the policy is not seeing a result as expected. And so, introduction of the new point-based system is a significant step forward, and this started. However, uncertainty remains on its efficacy because 11 months have already passed, but we were expecting 2,000 people to settle. However, only 432 people decided to permanently stay in Japan. So this is far less than the expected target. So now there's a review to the policy, and discussion is taking place. Especially I am also at the university, and I want to say a few words about this advanced, highly skilled PhD people. If you look at 432 people, only 17 are new people. So it's difficult to get new PhD people to Japan because there's a fierce competition all over the world to get high-skilled people. So this might relate to whether we have a Japanese model or not. But I think we need to attract people who are already in Japan to settle in Japan. So I think we need to change the weight of the policy. And usually if a foreigner has lived in Japan for 10 years and if they are recognized as a high-skilled person, then they will get the permanent visa for 5 years. This point system is only for academics and expertise like language and IT, and also management and IT. And the expertise area was where the most applicants were, and the academics where the foreign students apply. This was very small in number. So I think we need to put more effort into this academic area so that we can have more of the people, PhD people, to get permanent residency in Japan. And 70 points must be acquired in order to apply for advanced skilled visa. And in case of the students in Japan, this is not such a difficult point to get. However, besides the basic point, there's a bonus point, such as the research area and whether they've got the bachelor's degree in Japan. This point is very small, so I think we want to increase this point so that the students studying Japan, they will make efforts to write a thesis, and even after they get the PhD, they will try to stay in Japan where they have a brighter future. So there was only 65 applicants in the PhD area. So let's look at the number of PhD awarded to students from foreign countries. So there are 2,000 people the foreign people who got PhD in Japan. So if they automatically apply for a permanent visa in Japan, that would be great. So I think I think it's natural to think that these people will contribute to Japan. And there are benefits. That is, we can increase our competitive power in this fierce competition globally, and we can increase the number of students. PhD takes 3 years to take, so these students have stayed in Japan for 3 years, so they know about Japan, and the Japanese language skill is very perfect, fluent. Some of them even speak better Japanese than native Japanese. So I think this to focus on them would be really benefit, and we don't even need to teach them Japanese language, so that's a real benefit. However, these PhD graduates will probably concentrate in 3 metropolitan areas, especially in Tokyo. So this is my conclusion. So as I talked about the trend, after Japan is getting out of the recession, maybe we will see increase in the migration. However, we don't know whether we will go back to the level before 2008. And Japan is seeing a low birth rate and aging society, so we should positively seek a policy for replacement migration. And Japanese decrease in population is there is a big gap between East Japan and Southeast. There is a gap in the situation of decreasing population in Japan. And I think we need to share these. We have shared conditions with East and Southeast countries, implying the applicability of Japanese model in the region. So I think we need the policy, national policy for integration of migrants. If there's no national policy, the local governments will not be able to make their own policy unless there is a national policy. So with a decreasing population now, if we are to expect contribution from migration, I think the most important issue is for the country, Japanese government, to make a policy. And in this seminar, we're talking about the Japanese model in migration. This is very difficult, but Japan is not an English-speaking country, and we must take that into account when we make a policy. And because of a low birth rate and aging society, we are seeing that same conditions in East Asia and Southeast Asia. So I think if we make a Japanese model, then this could be applicable to other Asian countries, and I think there will be a lot of support toward this model. Thank you very much.
石川先生ありがとうございました。それではここで午前の
Professor Ishikawa, thank you very much. This concludes the morning program for today. If you leave this hall, please don't leave the valuable behind, and leave the interpretation receiver at the reception desk. And please come back to your seat by 1:30, at which we'll begin the afternoon session. And please, you are invited to fill in the questionnaire sheets if you have any questions or comments to the speakers today. And today's program is streamed live on the internet, as you can see at this internet address.